Hello and welcome back. I'm Natalie MacDonald and you're watching Sydney Direct on Dukascopy TV. The banking and finance community is changing. It's becoming more ethical. One of the corporations at the heart of that is the Banking and Finance Oath. To find out a little bit more information on this and ultimately how it looks to change the investor experience, I spoke with Dr. Simon Longstaff, Executive Director for the Centre of Ethics. Simon, many thanks for taking the time to chat with Dukascopy TV today. We much appreciate it.
Pleasure.
So walk us through then sort of the current state of play that you see in terms of the ethical nature of the financial services sector at present.
Well, I think one of the most important things to realise is that after the global financial crisis, a lot of people wanted to know of the financial services industry itself, what did it stand for beyond just regulation? People within the industry were saying, look, regulation is important, but there needs to be a balance, and the public was asking what went beyond that. And so initiatives like the Banking and Finance Oath, which have been developed here in Australia but with international application, have come together as a voluntary tool which says wherever you are in the industry there are certain core principles that we are prepared to stand beside. And if we can get that right, then it lays the foundation, a common foundation for all upon which others can build and which regulation can complement.
It's quite a unique role that regulators are playing in this development of sort of this oath and this move towards greater professionalism and greater ethics. It's a far cry from simply the years of compliance, really.
Well, I think one of the most important things about the Australian regulators, particularly APRA and ASIC, is that they have allowed something like the Banking and Finance Oath to emerge as a voluntary initiative, so it's nothing that's being mandated. But perhaps even more importantly, they've recognised that if you're going to have a very well regulated structure, whether it's through prudential regulation or market regulation, what you need to do is to address questions of culture. That it's not enough just to have a compliant system with a set of rules in place unless the core values and principles relating to the purpose of the system as a whole and of its individual actors is also being realised. So there have been leads in Australian law for this for quite a while, but now what's happening is that APRA, through its risk culture standard, are saying to boards, we're not going to tell you what culture to have, but you must be able to identify what you're aiming for yourself, and you must be able to say whether or not what you're aiming for is actually being realised. And ASIC is doing something very similar too. So this is new territory, really, quite unlike, as you say, regulators who are often more interested in the rules and regulations. In this case, they're driving responsibility back into boardrooms, back into senior management to make sure that the culture is correct.
In terms of, as you mentioned, it's a voluntary mandate, there's an element almost of self-governance to it with how corporations look to take on this oath and create those measures and those objectives. What sort of response then are you actually seeing for companies to be going about this and achieving that?
Well, you've got to separate two things. The Banking and Finance Oath is an entirely voluntary process, and that's where you've got particularly senior leadership within the finance sector across Australia signing up and making a personal commitment. The standards in relation to culture are in fact part of the formal regulatory system, but it's open textured in the sense that it's saying to companies, you need to make your own decisions about how you nominate what you stand for and how you measure the extent to which you're there. Now, some of the companies are for the first time starting to have a really close look in the mirror. You can do employee satisfaction surveys and things like that, but in our experience from the work we've been doing with major institutions, these are systems that are often gamed by people because they're linked to rewards and things of that kind. We've developed a process called the Everest process, which is it's about 20 years old now, and it's been refined by our work with the military and a whole lot of different organisations. What it does is it provides an incredibly well-polished reflection back into an organisation where the only thing that we're looking to measure these days is how much the organisation is like what it claims to be for itself. So the days of benchmarking banks against other banks or what's considered to be world's best practice, there's still some value in that. That's not where the true gold lies for this, because all of the risk is in the gaps that open up between what you say you stand for and what you actually do. Because if your own people say, well, they don't really believe it, why should I? Then they fill that gap with self-interested conduct, which often gives rise to very grave risk. So companies are starting to ask the question, they're starting to look more closely, but I think we're really still at the early stages of this. I think some have only just begun to put their toe in the water of what they will really need to do.
How then ultimately do you see this shaping the client experience, the experience of the investor, of the consumer?
Well, actually what I think is going to happen is that certainly in things like banking, right across the banking spectrum, and insurance, and all of them, the ability to distinguish between organisations according to what they do will disappear. It's pretty much already gone. You can walk into one organisation or another and they do the same things. They have roughly the same products. So what you're seeing emerge now is a new ecology of meaning where they stand for something different. Not quite the same thing in each case. They've got their own personality. And then it becomes an interesting thing where you attract capital, investors, employees, customers, suppliers into a network that all say, I want to be involved with something of that kind. So we're going to compete at a higher level than just what we happen to do. There'll still be advantages for those who get their technology right and their system and policy all in alignment and things like that. But I think it's a much more interesting ecological system now around meaning, which is starting to emerge for the benefit of everybody.
Simon, it's a pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That is all we've got time for right now, but our many thanks to Dr. Simon at Longstaff for his time. I'll be back with plenty more exclusive interviews for you from the Financial Services Council's annual conference taking place in the Gold Coast. For now though, it's goodbye from me.